Welcome to the fourth installment of the CG character workflow from Fuse to Mixamo to Photoshop. In this segment we are going to use Photoshop for lighting and rendering your 4 views. So now is the time to prepare your image for rendering so that we have 4 nice views to lay out on the 11x17 template ready for critique. We're going to talk about managing the light, and we're also going to talk about managing the shadows and lighting that come from the environment. Plus, you'll notice that I've already gone back in and edited the diffuse map of the jacket just to give her those red sleeves to make her look complete. Now I'm happy, now I'm ready for critique. Let's take a look at our 3D panel and understand the difference between the two cameras. The default camera will reset all of your values for any custom changes here, and it will reset to these exact values. We want to be able to edit this and always make sure that we stay in the current view and don't accidentally default to these values. So let's dial in something that looks like a pseudo-orthographic view. Now remember, orthographic view are very distinct flat to the picture plane type of effect, and there's an orthographic button. But perhaps you guys want a little bit perspective, but not so drastic as this 67 millimeters of a lens, or FOV, field of view. We're going to dial in a number such as 200 millimeters. That's zooming the camera lens. We'll hit the Enter key. If we grab this one, it'll bring her back into the viewport, but that will be changing the field of view. That is, zoom the 3D camera. Instead, we want to choose slide the 3D camera, which is dolly. With the Shift key held down and dragging up with the mouse, you're going to be able to bring her back into a viewport. Now use your intuition and make sure that you got a similar scale of the character in this viewport for all 4 views. There will be some chance to scale and move around in the final composition, but we don't want to stretch and pull on the rendered image too many times. While we have all this editable layers, we're going to do it as much as we can with the camera and get it right. So this looks pretty good to me. I'm going to pay attention to this red line and my other attempts in the other files to dolly the camera and change the field of view. I'm going to try to keep this similar position on the canvas. So now's a good time to save your work and take advantage of your history palette and perhaps make a nice snapshot. So we can always come back to that if we make a boo-boo. Every 3D layer will come with an infinite light as well as an environment light. When you select each one, you'll see that the properties panel refreshes to give you controls for each of these. If we switch over to environment, this is the IBL, or it's an image file, which provides light into the scene. These little dots of light versus the gray background are what are giving us that appearance. These are working in tandem, environment together with the infinite light. You can revert to one or the other by using the eyeball, but we're going to talk about managing the infinite light. And when you select it, you realize we have some harsh shadows right now. You can grab this and swing it to your liking. But be careful, don't run your shadows off the edge of the viewport because you're bringing this image into the others. We want a consistent, solid shadow with no sliced off edges. I suggest just keeping it in the center. If you want to dial it down to be a little bit in front of your model to illuminate up under the chin, etc., you can. Just keep it a little bit towards the center. In this case, though, remember these values so you can apply the same to the standing pose. If you need to, you can go to the coordinates of your selected infinite light and jot down on paper these angles. So if you're happy, then let's go for the next step. That would be to soften the shadows a little bit for our style for critique. I'm going to go back to this tab in the properties panel for the selected infinite light, and here I'm going to soften up the shadows a little bit. It's real subtle, it's hard to see, but in the final render it'll look nice. And the same goes for the environment light. We're not going to grab it and swing it with the orbit tool or anything. There's no need to edit it for our particular critique. And here you can also dial in that number. I've already done it. So now it's time to do a test render to see the subtle effects of that infinite light and these dialed in values. Pay attention to our layers panel. What we're actually seeing is the 3D layer over top of the background layer. Hiding the background layer shows us the pixel grid, but it's hard to see shadows cast across the pixel grid, so we can leave that turned on. So I've got all my lighting set up, dialed in, my point of view is all correct, my infinite light is dialed in like I like it. Now I am ready to do a test render just to see what it looks like. Now a test render doesn't have to run for more than a couple minutes for you to get a sense of what it might look like. So let's give that a shot. I might switch over to my marquee selection tool to hide the 3D layer controls that sort of cloud the look of everything. As long as my 3D layer is selected, I can go up to the 3D menu and choose Render 3D Layer. Now, this may take a little while for the progress bar to appear at the bottom of the screen. These blue dotted line segments will start appearing all over your canvas, showing that it is rendering parts and pieces as it goes. Let's understand what's happening here. It is rendering with all of the controls that you put into the light and the environment and the diffuse map, etc. But it's going to be in RAM, which means that is in the memory of the computer. And when this is finished, or if you hit the escape key to cancel the render, that preview is there in pixels only temporarily. If you click around to other settings, other layer parts, that RAM preview of that render may disappear. You would have waited all that time for nothing. I'll show you a trick how to save it in a moment. So far, everybody, it's gone a half a minute and it's at 1%. Photoshop is expecting about an hour for this render. For our class project, for the final presentation, I'm going to let you guys render between 50 and 75%. I think it will still look good for a medium quality draft. We'll learn what this process is all about, and we don't need to go all the way to 100% for our class experiment. So, time to escape from this render just to see what it looks like, because we've got a good sense of the lighting right now. I'm going to hit the escape key, and it's only gone about 3%. Here's how to save that render preview without losing it. We'll go to Select, All, Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste. Don't be surprised if it comes in misaligned. All you need to do is grab that Move tool, the pasted layer becomes its own layer, and you can hold down the Shift key and drag with the Move tool and snap it back in place. Now, hide the 3D layer for a minute so you get a sense of really what that render preview looks like. I might go ahead and rename this layer. So that this pasted layer now is set up just right. I'm going to save my work. So let's see what that looks like up close. Control 1 on the keyboard will show your document pixel to pixel for your monitor. I'll pan around with the spacebar. So this is a low quality 1% render, lots of grain in it, pixelization, it's just not ready. So we will keep this layer just to see that the lighting, yeah, it looked good. So if you like the lighting, you can continue. If you don't, you can make some changes by hiding this pasted preview, going back to your 3D layer, and making a change with the infinite light intensity. But when you do so, then the RAM preview disappears, and you're back to the default look of the 3D layer. So do some tests, do another render, see if you like that intensity change that you made. That's up to you. And when you're finally ready, now it's time to do the official render. Go to my move tool, 3D layer selected, and now when I go to 3D, it says render 3D layer. Time to go to the snack machine and come back, hit the escape key at about 50 to 75% for this medium quality draft presentation for the critique. So my render was going about 75%, and I hit the escape key, and that stopped the render. I had stopped the render. I need to be careful. That render now is in RAM. It's very fragile. If I click around, I could lose it. So I need to do select all, edit copy, and edit paste. So that render now is pasted to another layer. So this was my render at about 75%. I saved my work, and I now know that nothing can go wrong and lose that time that I waited. I'm going to use a move tool. I've got this render paste that I've got, and I'll drag it to snap it back to where she was. Hide the 3D layer, and I can see a preview of what it'll look like when I bring this into another composition for the final presentation 11 by 17 document. So now I'm ready to do a render on my standing pose. Make sure that I dialed in these numbers from my action pose to match the angle of the lighting, the intensity of the lighting, and the softness of the shadows. So now it's time to start the render. So my render has been complete. I've got it there on a different layer. I'm back in my layer now. The render is hidden. This is just my 3D layer with a default lighting preview. I'm ready to create the standing pose from the side and the back to prepare for renders of those two views. I'm going to keep all my lighting presets or my custom lighting that I made a while ago. I'll make sure that my skeleton is selected. Make sure that I'm in my 3D layer. I get back to my move tool, and now I have the option for rotating the character. I need the orbit tool. I need to hold down the shift key, and I will be able to turn the character to the side. I didn't change any of my settings on my current view. I didn't click around to the default camera and change my current view. Remember, I'm at 200 millimeters. I didn't change the position of the camera by dollying in or out. I've got the selection for the skeleton, and I rotated it to be a pseudo orthographic side view. I can change my tool. So I'm ready to save my project here as a different name because I don't want to overwrite the settings I had. So this is standing pose, and this will be side. This is just to be a safeguard. I don't overwrite, change any settings, and I can run a separate render without worrying about losing what I did on the standing pose front. So if I'm happy with this view, then I'm ready to render. Now, I'm going to prepare this file for the back view. I'm going to save as. This is the standing pose, in this case back. Back to my move tool. All of my 3D layer controls are now visible. Make sure I've got the orbit tool or Photoshop calls it the Rotate 3D Object tool. Hold down the Shift key and position the character facing the camera like so, to the back. I didn't change any of the camera nor the lighting, consistent for all 4 views. Switch to my marquee tool just to get a preview without the 3D layer overlays, and I'm happy with that. Ready to render. So let's review. I have created a action pose, I edited texture, made sure the lighting was just right, and then I made sure that the lighting was the same, dialed in, same numbers, etc. for these other views. I made a side view, a back view, and I'm going to just help myself out. This was the front view. And I made renders of all of those. Select all, copy, paste, so I can save that RAM preview render in a new layer. Now's the time to open them all up and put them into one document for the critique.